The scriptorium was silent, save for the faint hiss of pneumatics and the distant clicking of cogitators. The air was thick with the scent of sanctified oil and incense, mingled with something faintly organic, like blood beginning to clot. Magos Ezra Volgryn's mechadendrites wove through the air with practiced precision, their brass-sheathed tips bearing the sacred calibration tools of 17 generations. His private workshop was a sanctum of cold calculation, where servo skulls cast overlapping pools of harsh light across workbenches scarred by centuries of use. Banks of cognitors hummed their binary prayers from ferrocrete alcoves, maintained through rituals of his own devising. On his workbench sat Construct-42V, his personal transcription servitor. Its lower body was absent, unneeded, replaced by a tangle of cabling and reinforced tubing that merged the ancient machinery below. Machinery Ezra had modified over 30 years to achieve optimal neurosynchronization. Its torso, clamped securely at shoulders and waist, represented the perfect marriage of pallid flesh and polished augmetics, a union of organic and mechanical precision that had served him faithfully since his elevation to the rank of Magos. Ezra's gaze lingered on the servitor's hands, skeletal fingers that had once transcribed his every observation with flawless accuracy. Day and night, while he had perfected sacred machines, the servitor's arms had moved without pause, preserving every detail for the archives of the Omnissiah. Now, inexplicably, they hung limp at its sides. The quill lay discarded on the table below, ink smeared across the latest theoretical treatise on neural pathway enhancement. "Primary function compromised," the words rasped through his rebreather, a sharp deviation from his usual calm. His auxiliary mechadendrite coiled tightly against his spine, a motion he would never permit in front of others. His brass fingers clicked against each other, their rhythm slightly off, too erratic. Ezra forced his voice steady. "Neural dampener outputs. Steady. No evident degradation of synaptic pathways." He leaned closer, his magnifier clicking softly as it whirred into place. The servitor's head was motionless, its cranial plating smooth and polished, sockets running along the scalp to house its circuits. Its face, pale and devoid of vitality, was the perfect mask of stillness. Every 14 seconds, it blinked, a precise, mechanical motion to preserve the organic components of its eyes. Their glassy surface reflected faint glimmers from the lumen globes above, capturing light, but revealing nothing. Ezra paused, his augmetic eyes cycling through spectral patterns as they analysed the servitor's form. Even in its compromised state, Construct-42V exhibited the sacred symmetry he had laboured to perfect. Each augmetic component was calibrated to complement its remaining organic systems. The marriage of flesh and machine followed the exact proportions he had refined through years of careful modification. Where human weakness had once existed, he had installed precision. Where mortal limits had threatened deficiency, he had implemented perfection. The design could not be flawed. He had verified every calculation 17 times before implementation. He would verify them again. Ezra adjusted the servitor's cranial interface. His movements measured in micron-precise increments, The hum of recalibration synchronized with the drone of his cogitators, creating a harmony that matched the optimal frequency patterns stored in his neural archives. The servitor's gaze remained fixed forward, while Ezra leaned closer. His mechadendrites extended, each movement accompanied by a cascade of neural activity readings from the servitor's cortical interface. The connection points registered optimal conductivity, 99.97% alignment with approved templates. The synaptic bridge showed no degradation. Then, the servitor's eyes moved. Ezra froze. The motion was so subtle, he nearly missed it. For an instant, those pale, glassy eyes shifted toward him. Not a twitch, not a reflex. It was deliberate. They locked onto him with a direct, unblinking stare. And then, just as quickly, they snapped back to their original, fixed position. Ezra's pulse quickened. He blinked, trying to process what he had just seen. Had it been a trick of the light? A malfunction in his own augmetics? He waited, tension coiling tighter in his chest. No movement followed. The servitor was still, its gaze as vacant and as fixed as ever. He exhaled, the hiss of his rebreather amplifying in the stillness. His heart continued to race, but he forced himself to focus. It had been nothing. A momentary glitch, a trick of the light. His eyes flicked back to the servitor's motionless face, still empty, still serene. He checked the event logs. Nothing. No movement, no anomaly. It had been nothing. Ezra closed his hand around the soldering iron. He pressed the heated tip against the servitor's cheek, watched with detached precision as flesh sizzled and greyed. The servitor didn't flinch, didn't blink. Its organic components responded exactly as they should. Automated healing protocols would repair the minor damage, just as they had repaired thousands of similar maintenance marks over the decades. He inhaled deeply through his rebreather, the familiar scent of cauterized flesh grounding him. Of course, there had been no response. His mind wandered. He was allowing imagination to cloud logic. Unacceptable. His shoulders slumped, and he sank back into his chair, elbows pressing heavily into the workbench. His mechadendrites, now motionless, hung like weary extensions of his own frame. Across from him, the servitor stared back from its restraints, an unbroken image of efficiency, rendered useless by its inexplicable stillness. The workshop, once a sanctuary of purpose, now felt oppressively still. The hum of cogitators was too soft, the flicker of lumen globes too faint to break the suffocating weight of silence. He wrapped his fingers against the table, the rhythm uneven, the sound an irritating interruption of his thoughts. He couldn't stop himself. It was a venting frustration, one he would have suppressed had any of his peers been present to witness it. Every test confirmed what he already knew. The Servitor was flawless. The cranial interface was intact. Synaptic connections were pristine. The servo mechanisms responded with the precision he had painstakingly refined. And yet, it would not function. It would not transcribe. "Explain," he muttered, the word filtering through his rebreather as a hollow rasp. His eyes locked onto the servitor's face, scanning once more for any imperfection he might have missed. He had cycled through every spectrum: visible, ultraviolet, infrared. Spectral bands designed to detect traces of energy imperceptible to the human eye. All revealed the same truth. There was nothing wrong. Ezra leaned back, the pneumatics of his lumbar supports hissing faintly. His rebreather amplified the slow, deliberate inhale. He forced his thoughts to settle, to push past the anger and focus on logic. Emotions were wasteful, a contamination of clarity. "Iteration 31, he muttered, initiating another diagnostic sequence, with a flick of his brass-tipped fingers. The cogitators hummed in response, their machine spirits yielding to his command. Green-lit runes cascaded across his vision as the results populated. No anomalies detected. The memory of its gaze returned to him unbidden. That flicker of motion, so faint it might not have happened at all. Those pale, glassy eyes. The impression clung to him like a virus in his cognitive engines, refusing to be purged. No matter how his logic protocols protested, he had seen movement. Hadn't he? Minutes bled into hours as Ezra sat motionless, his gaze locked on the servitor. The air in the workshop grew thick, the incense mingling with the arid scent of cauterized flesh and burning circuits. He pushed himself upright, mechadendrites extending to steady his weight. His eyes never left the servitor. For the first time in decades, he felt the cold touch of inadequacy creeping through his cogitation engines. The realization like a shard of ice in his consciousness. The servitor's eyes blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. 14 seconds later, they blinked again. The rhythmic precision mocked him. Ezra found himself hating it, hating its quiet perfection. "You blink, but you do not move," he murmured, his voice low and bitter. "Is this the limit of your capability? Or is it mine?" "I think," he said, each word carefully measured, then deliberately, letting his voice shift to something cruder, more human. "You don't work because you're lazy. Nothing but a worthless, lazy piece of meat." Its lip curled.